Hello, I'm Diamond Smith with Maryland Realtors.
And I'm Taylor Kitzfeller. What do you think? Should we talk about cooperative compensation in our forms?
It's a hot topic for sure.
Well, first, we made changes to the broker compensation paragraph. We wanted to emphasize that commissions are negotiable, not fixed.
I'm also looking at the compensation to be paid by buyer paragraph. Didn't this used to be blank and fillable? Why the change?
Well, you're right. I've received multiple hotline calls, and I'm sure you have as well, where agents have been confused about what to write in that blank space, causing them to input improper information. We've made it simpler.
How?
Well, now there are only 3 options that compensation that a client and agent can agree to: a % of the sales price, a % of the sales price plus a fee, or simply just a fee.
That's perfect. That's exactly how we teach this to brokers. What about changes to the compensation paid by listing broker paragraph?
So first, in accordance with the settlement agreement, we have removed all references to cooperative compensation being offered on the MLS. Next, one of our main goals was to make the concept of compensation easier to grasp when talking to clients, so they understand what happens depending upon the amount of compensation offered by the listing broker. The first paragraph explains that compensation offered by the listing broker will be credited against the compensation that the buyer has agreed to pay their broker. The second paragraph explains what happens when the compensation offered by the listing broker is greater or less than the compensation the buyer has agreed to pay their broker. If the compensation offered is less, the buyer will be responsible for paying the difference to their broker. If the compensation is equal to or greater than the compensation buyer has agreed to pay their broker, the buyer will not have to pay their broker any additional amount. Also, per the settlement agreement, we added a sentence noting that the broker may not receive any compensation that exceeds the compensation amount contained in their agreement. The third paragraph lets the buyer know that if the offered broker-to-broker compensation is less than the compensation that the buyer agreed to pay their broker, the buyer can include with their offer an addendum that asks the seller to pay buyer's broker the amount of that difference. The next section notes that if the property is not listed on the MLS, the broker shall make any request for compensation from the seller at first contact.
This should be familiar to everyone watching. Our statewide forms committee created a form called Authorization to Show and Pay Buyer Broker back in 2017. That form will be used with the for sale by owner, where the seller is unrepresented and the property is not on the MLS.
Right, Diamond. It is very important that our members explain this updated compensation section to their buyer clients so they have a full understanding of how compensation works in a real estate transaction. In fact, it is so important that we have added in an initial section at the end of the compensation paragraph for the buyer to acknowledge that they have read and understand the compensation paragraph.